Hello and welcome back to Pond Life, Ministry Beneath the Surface. Today I am here with the amazing Children, Youth, and Family team. I'm Becca Richardson, Director of Children's Ministry here at Shepherd of the Lake, and I'm going to let my excellent teammates introduce themselves.
I'm Ann Janish. I am the Director at Shepherd's Flock Preschool.
Hey y'all, I'm John Holt, Director of Children, Youth, and Family here at the SOLLC.
Thanks, Ann and John. So we had a conversation about what should we talk about this week? What's on the forefront of our minds? And the theme that really rose to the surface, pun intended. No, seriously. The theme that kept coming up is just the concept of reentry. And as we, as a Children, Youth, and Family team, have been talking about, how do we begin to even think about program planning, operating still in a state of unknown as we begin to reenter into the world of in-person programming. For some of us have been doing that for the past year. How do we do that? And something that has been at the forefront of our minds is just the fact that all of us have been dealing with a collective trauma for over a year now and operating in a constant state of ambiguity and anxiety really is the perfect recipe for chronic stress, chronic fatigue. And so keeping that at the forefront of our minds as we're planning to welcome families and kids back into this space, into ministry in person, how do we do that? And we thought we'd start with our own stories about what we've experienced both personally and professionally this past year to really help us remember that everybody has a story from this past year, and that will help us really live God's word and lead with empathy and kindness as we continue to shake it off and find what our new normal really is. So, Anne, I know that you've had a lot of experience with an official reentry type program, having your whole world completely change from one day to the next. And I'm hoping you're willing to share a little bit about that today and whether or not that was helpful to you over this past year. So if you're interested, we'd love to hear about it.
Thanks, Becca. Yeah, so we are a military family, and so there have been 3 different deployments that we've gone through, and 2 with kids. And so it's interesting because the military is always evolving, which is, I think, kind of the theme we need to look at too for our reentry is how does that evolve? And they would have a formal program set up for the soldiers to come back and do a reentry on their own before they came back even to do a reentry with us as their family members. And so it was really fascinating from the mental health piece as well as just kind of the feeling piece, the socio-emotional piece too, of how does that play into how do you welcome that soldier home in a way that is going to benefit everybody. So there's no one size fits all for all these families. And so what was interesting too is we were able to pick and choose some of the reentry workshops that fit our scenario. Maybe it was somebody that was a single soldier coming back or someone newly married or someone that runs a business, things like that. So we always try to pick ones that were relevant with our family and with our kids. Now, with that said, what we were taught when they were coming back on that particular weekend, you're in this euphoria, you're in this, I'm touching my soldier, they're finally home safe and sound. And so you're taking this in and you're like, it's not gonna be a big deal. Like, we've got this, he's home. And then what you realize is maybe 3 months, 6 months down the road, what you heard in that workshop, you're like, oh, we're starting to encounter that. We're starting to encounter something from an injury that might be playing out or some of their own PTSD from what happened. And so a lot of that, I think what I'm getting at is that this year is so unusual for everyone and everyone's story is so different. So what we could be reading and what we could be putting out today may be relevant for a handful of our families, but it may not come into play maybe 3 months, 6 months from now. But we always have to have this open forum that people can talk and feel safe to kind of say where they are right at that moment and to know that your story is different than mine and my story is different than yours. And we're all experiencing it differently, but we have to validate what that is at that moment for that person. And I think that's part of what I'm hoping to bring for the preschool families and the kids. So then going forward for us in the fall, we're going to be welcoming back a handful of families that were here this year and a bunch of new families. And so we just need to continuously be present for them and validate where they are with their concerns and with their hopes and visions for our program, and know that it is going to be evolving, and we will take forward steps, backward steps, but we're here to support that process for you all, and know that we will be flexible. We're going to be here with grace like we have been all year, just to say, what do you need from us now, today? And it could be different 2 weeks from now or 3 months from now, but we're here to support that reentry as well.
That's awesome.
That is awesome. Thank you, Anne. I think what I really heard you say there is how important it is for us to be just so individualized and personalized, and that what one person needs today looks different tomorrow, and then what their companion needs looks different each day as well. So it's really just recognizing that what we bring to each day and each moment is different, and that we can best be here for people if we remember that. And we know that maybe what we used to do isn't what is serving people right now. And I think that is just a really, really insightful way to look at things. So thank you for sharing that. So John.
Yes.
What do you have to share with us about this topic?
Yeah. So thanks, Anne. That's, that kind of connects in a little bit with my family story through the pandemic. For us, our trauma came with the loss of my father. And my dad had been battling cancer for a long time. And then at the beginning of the pandemic, he lost his battle with cancer. And as a family, to struggle in the grief of death in the midst of this pandemic, I think that was the part that was really traumatic for all of us. And specifically, the fact that we couldn't have a funeral. We couldn't reach out to, we could reach out, but we couldn't be in person with family and with friends. We couldn't get hugs. We couldn't get the usual support through death and grief. Wasn't there, wasn't available. And so you had to find other ways to deal with that. And so as we grieved together as a family and just an outpouring of support from friends and everyone, we had to put some things on pause and say, we can't do a funeral now. We're going to have to wait. We're going to have to wait with all these things. We're going to have to wait with all these things and hold on until we can. And so I guess what we really learned as a family and what I took from that and what has impacted me is that whole 6 months down the line, 8 months down the line, then we had to kind of bring all those emotions back. And then we had to kind of start to do that grieving process. And that was hard. That was hard for our family and looking out for each other. What really helped in all of that, people gave me space to figure it out, to grieve in a different way. People took time, not just to send a kind word, but to kind of let me have my good days and bad days. People gave me space to figure out how I was going to kind of get out of that funk of death, that funk of grief. And that was really meaningful to me, that people kind of said, John, you got to figure this out for yourself and get it done, but do it the way that you need to do it. That was really helpful, and that was really powerful for me and my family. So,
yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that, that insight that you took from that as well, holding space for everybody in terms of just where they're at. And what you had said, Anne, talking about, every day we're going to show up differently because we've all got different things that we're going through, and just the vestiges of what had happened months ago, now we kind of are sifting through those and digging out, so to speak, into, okay, so how do we keep moving forward, and how do we keep meeting people where they're at in order to best serve them, as well as ourselves, being aware of what we're bringing every day so that we can either be our best self or just say, you know what, I'm not going to be able to meet you there today. And understanding that for everybody. That's awesome. That's a really cool insight.
I think the other thing that you noted too, right? So that's heavy grief and loss issues. And I think for people to be aware of what does grief and loss, what does that translate within this year? And so many different types of grief and loss.
Yes.
Right? The losses of loved ones, the losses of normal routines, the losses of jobs, the losses of contact, physical contact with people. I think that needs to be noted too, is when we talk through these things for families to understand for themselves and with their kids and whomever else, all those losses. We need to name those, especially for kids. It might be just a loss of not being able to have a parent or grandparent at a birthday party, or the loss of not going to school on a regular basis. Whatever those losses are, I feel like that's part of that discussion that we want people to be comfortable with, naming those for people. And there's such a strange timeline, right, of losses, grief and loss, and everyone works through that differently, but there might be things that then come up for you that you need to resurface that and work through that again. And
sometimes it leaks out, by the way.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it's not so formal, like I'm dealing with this grief very appropriately. Sometimes it leaks out and not in the best of who we are.
Absolutely.
And in those moments, that's when people giving me a little bit of a break was so powerful for me to say, maybe that's not John's best day, but, give him support and let him do his thing.
And when you say leaking out, like, what does that look like? So I primarily work with those little ones. I mean, we're all working with kids, but so I've got that preschool age. And can it be anxiety, right? When
Absolutely.
we talked about instead of a crying loss? Can it be the separation with a mom or a dad again, that all of a sudden after 4 or 5 months coming and getting dropped off for preschool, now it's traumatic again? Could it be, it looks different.
Anger at Costco because there's no toilet paper and you're frustrated and you're like, it can be anything.
Right? So how that comes out. And then giving that person that grace and that space to be able to feel that and know that they have a place to call upon us to help them through that piece of it too.
And affirm it. And affirm that, what?
Validate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. No, I think that is an impactful way to almost put a lens on moving forward, with remembering that everyone has that story and it will look different in how they're dealing with that story, and just making space for everybody, including ourselves, to be whomever we are that day, or be whoever we can be for somebody else that day, because you don't know what behavior is a symptom. When I think about the educational piece of it, all behavior is a symptom of something. And so just remembering that the symptom could be, or the behavior could be, the result of a variety of things that maybe haven't happened recently or happened, 6 months ago, but there's effects of it at that moment. And so leading with empathy and leading with understanding helps not only that person, but helps us stay in a space and a state that we can still be our best selves for them, particularly under the lens of ministry, making sure that we're where we need to be to help others. Yeah. I think about, you mentioned all the different types of losses, Anne, and so in our home, we had an interesting story that I don't think is quite as unique. A lot of people, we had a job loss due to COVID in our home. My husband worked in an industry that really took a pretty big hit in terms of participation due to, you can't be in large crowds. And it was an interesting thing to experience because it wasn't an immediate job loss. So I think about, for him, watching him go through that, he already went through half of it, honestly, because he wasn't going into the office anymore. And the work that he did already changed remarkably based upon what was going on in the industry. So it was almost like a scaffolded, like a weaning of it. And he has gone through this once before, and it was just markedly different in dealing with it. Number one, because he kind of had an idea of what to expect and timelines and how things could work. And number two, it wasn't an abrupt, Friday afternoon, take your box and go. And so that was just interesting to reflect upon that and see it. But the timing of it was also odd in that, I started this position this year, and the ability to leave my previous position was a little bit due to COVID. You don't leave in an education setting after a school year has begun. You just don't do that. But everything was changed and everything was uprooted to the point where that was no longer out of the question.
Mm-hmm.
And so not a day or two after I put in my notice, we hear that Tom has lost his job. And that's where you go, well, Where's the sign in this? Like, was this the sign that this was the right choice, or is there a sign that was like, hey, you maybe want to slow your roll a little bit? So we definitely had to reflect upon that. But in the end, we both knew that the calling to be in this position was the right choice to make, and it's panned out that way. But going through the pandemic with taking a position that was maybe not as stable as the one I had come from, and maybe not as it's ministry. We're all here because we love it, not because we're getting rich off of it. So that was just an interesting thing to navigate. And in the end, we're at a place right now where it was the right thing to have happen. He is reemployed, so hooray. In an industry that is his passion and loves and is just really thriving in that setting. And both of us don't think he would have been able to make that switch had he not been let go, along with hundreds of other people at his company. So just thinking of the double-edged of sword, one side is blunt and fine, and the other side is sharp and hard, and you just kind of oscillate between those two feelings. So,
the Holy Spirit's present in all of that,
yeah,
right? And trying to make those tough decisions, and job loss is trauma, right? Like that, there's trauma in all of that, or change.
Just navigating the change of it in the middle of change. And there's also a sense of community in that, though, where this time around, it was easier because you're not the only person, right? It's industry after industry after industry. And there are, social programs to help support that. So you're getting more on unemployment. And, we don't have a situation where we're paying rent, but if we needed support there, we have it. School districts were receiving federal funding for school lunch. So it's just like one more thing that is taken care of. And so also thinking about reflecting upon that and thinking about all of the positives in the world seeing, this is what's happening right now, and stepping up it's just such a cool concept and a cool way to kind of see the light between the clouds. So as we're moving forward and thinking about how we're creating programming and how we're being whomever people need us to be, I think these experiences that we've gone through have set us up pretty well to just remember that, people are bringing different things to us every day, and what we need to give to them might look different every day.
Yeah. Well, that's wrapping up our time, y'all. And, as you are figuring out your reentry path or plan out of this pandemic and out of this trauma, God calls us to see Jesus in everyone, and to see everybody has a journey and everybody has a struggle or a trauma that we may not even know about or see, but that we might be called to give folks that space and that love and that grace, no matter what they've gone through, no matter what they're going through. So let's remember to answer God's call there, and that our story is God's story, and God's story is our story. All right, y'all. Thanks for being with us.